Maybe.
Welcome to the EMN podcast, where philosophy meets disaster and uncomfortable truths meet the profession we call emergency management. This is not safe space thinking. This is the arena. Let's begin.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are at in this world. And Andrew, I need to change the entry slide there because I got Dan's head there. And Dan will be coming back here shortly. We just had a good meeting with him this morning discussing his triumphant return to the podcasting world. But that means I have to add additional. Andrew's going to be staying with us, and we're going to have a three person panel here every week. But today, it's not about Dan. It's not about me. It's not even about Andrew. It's all about Shannon and her new book. Shannon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm so excited to be a part of the arena. I was very excited about that intro. So I really appreciate you having me. I'm Shannon McNamee. I am the founder and CEO of RiverMac and the author of this new book, Strategic Disaster Coordination.
So full disclosure, Shannon and I met, well, it's been a long time now, at the Executive Academy at EMI. And since then, she has done some really great stuff. And I'm excited to have her back here on the show. It's been a bit since we've talked, and it's awesome to see you again. And congratulations on the book and everything you've been doing. So it's exciting. Now, I feel. Do you ever watch there's a movie or TV show, Big Bang Theory?
Yeah.
And they go, doctor, not a doctor. That's how I feel. Author, only a writer. I mean, so. Real quick, so congratulations. I go to that process, and Andrew can talk probably more about that process than I can because he's already published as well. So, Andrew, I'll hand it over to you really quick.
Sure. No, I think it's a labor of love because it's a very solitary undertaking, to write a book. I'm sure, Shannon, as you experienced, especially when you're both working and in the middle of responding or doing work. So to find the time to do it, and then getting the feedback from your colleagues, specialist people in the area, can be a little bit challenging. So I applaud the effort and I applaud the product. So as I told you before, I bought the book and I've started reading it, and I'm looking forward to continuing to do that. Great work.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. So here's the first question, and this goes with our title. Why do we keep falling short?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the moment that I had to decide to really write the book. I would say it was probably 2017, in the middle of that, crazy season. I think it was even probably before Hurricane Maria. I remember having a moment in the National Response Coordination Center, the NRCC, and just said, we're not really built for this. We don't have a system to really manage these pieces. And I kept having that sort of those moments throughout that year. And I would say that the first time I started writing this book or on this topic, I have the original notes. It was actually right after Hurricane Michael. I had gone down to help support a visit there. And, I think it really is a pattern that I saw over all the time of the work that I did. And specifically, I'll say just as a background too, I've done mostly bigger disasters, right? I worked for Red Cross for about 9 years, and then at FEMA. And I would say that my specialty really is the bigger ones overall. And so that you do see a lot of the similar type of issues happening. So once I had kind of noticed that pattern, I went to go back into the research, go back into the literature and see if anybody else was seeing it. And, I think that was the most shocking part, especially for someone who has an MPA, a Master of Public Administration, and was focused on disaster, that I went back and found that many people had said this before. And this is not a new theme, not a new conversation overall, too. So that's really the intent of this book, is to really identify all of the writings, the research, and then really pull in my own experiences on why it goes wrong. What are the pieces that are missing, the missing architecture, as I put in the subtitle, and then present a possible solution based on what a lot of that research says. But I'll break it down to the simplest part about this when I say that we in the, especially in the United States and, many parts of the world that are using similar type of systems, that we didn't build something for disasters. We utilized essentially the incident command system, but we just took a piece of it and not really used it in the way that it was meant to be used, right? Incident command system is fundamentally an on-scene coordination tool. It is mostly for first responders. It is for incidents. And there is a tremendous amount of research. In fact, a shocking amount of consensus in so many of this, of the disaster scholarship that says that ICS does not work in disasters. In fact, it can go the opposite direction. It can be harmful in disasters because of just the direction it looks, the spacing, the time planning of pieces of it, so many different ways in which it actually can be harmful, detrimental to an overall coordination model or a coordinated response. So I would say that that's the piece of it. And that's really what I wanted to share with everyone. Again, this is not something that's new. Many people have said this. So I tried to really pull all those pieces and explain it in a way that made sense to me, and really plain language, really talking through all the different pieces of it. And go back to even some of the early meetings that I was a part of when I was a consultant at FEMA, when I was, building up some of these new Homeland Security focused, post 9/11 tools and policies, and how we struggled because we went with what we had. The incident command system had been built out to such an extent, and the coordinated model, the sort of back-end model that would have been the disaster management model, the multi-agency coordination system, MAX, was never built out really, and really did not. I'll say California has a system too, so I always have to caveat with that. But really, emphasizing some of the history of it, the conversations that we moved forward with only half of the system, and we didn't do the part of it that's really our jobs, right? The emergency management, the back end, the EOC pieces of it. We didn't build that out. We have kind of different pieces that we put in. We have the emergency support functions, and we still use that with incident action planning. Then we put them all together, and that's not what they were intended to do. So that's really what I'm saying when I say that we didn't build a system built for disasters, and that we have this mixing architecture, which I attempted to start building and putting in kind of a skeleton framework of what it could be.
Absolutely.
One thing I want to step back on, because you mentioned in the book here, and I'm quoting that, and this is one agency. I won't name what agency it is, but I think it's true of a lot of agencies, in that they're understaffed, underfunded, and under-resourced in many different ways. And you elaborate on that, I think, in the early chapter. And at the same time, we're dealing with complex compounding, and of course, as we usually deal with, cascading events that take place that have multiple ripple effects that we see across various critical infrastructures. So with that being a huge challenge, right, for an individual emergency manager at a county level, local level, et cetera, what are the implications, and how can they change their orientation based upon what you're describing here?
Yeah. Thanks for that question. I think that's the part that I did spend a lot of time in struggling with. How do we each individually move towards this coordination model? How do we each build it? Because that's what I tried to build too, is the idea of simple actions that we can utilize in a lot of the work that we're doing, that kind of all meets up to an overall coordination model. And there's different pieces of that. But I would say that some of the biggest pieces that we really need to be, I would say, just become aware of is how the command and control model, the functions around command and control model, how they can be detrimental to resilience, to disaster preparedness, to disaster response, because they pull away from some of that community resilience, right? And I've talked about this more, I think I did in a little bit in the discussion, but a little bit more in my Disasters Are Different blog, is that there's a certain amount where in the last 20 years or so, which we've really kind of built back into this command and control model, we've used a lot of language, built a lot of norms that actually kind of pull us away from community action, kind of individual action, or even NGOs. I was at Red Cross, so I experienced a lot of this. I think unintentionally and in a way that helps support a command and control model, but does not necessarily support a disaster experience in which the majority of the actions and disasters that lead to response and stabilization and recovery are all going to be individual. They're going to be non-governmental. So, and I'm not talking about the NGO organizations. I'm just saying everyone who's not in the government, right? Individuals making individual decisions about what to do with their, whether or not they should evacuate, whether or not they should call the insurance company, right? All of these pieces are the really formative actions to overall stabilization and recovery. So to answer your question in the longest form too, I think you really need to look at what you're doing in the county level and understand how you can put more of that information out into the public, engage and consistently find ways to support and enable the individuals or the NGOs or the businesses and help them do what they need to do to recover. And I think understanding, this trend towards really building up your EOCs, like really building all the information into the EOCs, can be really detrimental to having that information out in the public too. And there's good reasons to do it, but I just want to emphasize that can be a root cause for why we have a lot of the struggles that we have in stabilization and recovery.
Well, I want to follow up, if I may, just for a moment, Todd.
Absolutely.
So the common understanding is, okay, the EOC is there to support the response that's going on in the field, whatever that field is, right? It might be a large field, it might be, multiple different fronts, et cetera, depending upon the type of, disaster event and, the impacts that are faced. But that the EOC is sort of the central point, that's the coordinating block, et cetera. What are you advocating or different that's going on right from what's right now? Because the common perception is that's where a lot of the coordination should go on with the whole of the community. Private CEOs, VOADs, COADs, whatever, the whole alphabet soup of groups that are part of that whole community.
And that makes sense when it is, a smaller incident that is really within that one jurisdiction, right? But when you've got a disaster that hits multiple jurisdictions, then all of those decisions are happening in the various different EOCs for government. But for everybody else, they're happening, wherever the disaster went, essentially, too. So there isn't, this is where I might be getting a little bit, pushing the boundaries a little bit, but the authority pieces that we're working off of in this are, not as clear as I think we make them out to be, right? Especially when you get into, who is, definitely when you get into the idea of somebody in charge, right? By using the incident command system, we have this idea that there's one person in charge that is in charge for all of those things that are happening, right? But when you look at even the community lifelines, if you look at those community lifelines, the decisions that are being made that are mostly not government are not happening within those county lines, right? You have multiple counties that are affected by one power company's decision making, right? So you have to all work together in order to support that one power company on helping them to get the power back online, right? Those are the pieces, and it really goes into the need for coordination in a simpler, easier way that's outside of the incident command. And I'll say, I hope that people read through this book, at least halfway through, and understand that there's, a certain, I would say, absurdity, if I really want to go out there, with the fact that, I would say arguably our main coordination document between all of the federal government and the next entities, state, tribal, territorial, the main coordination document is a joint incident action plan, right? That's not that's not built for that level of coordination, right? If we were doing it right, if you think about really the concepts of ICS, if you think about what that tactics meeting would look like, all of the federal government, everyone, all of their resources, and then all of that next entity, state, tribal, territorial, all into a daily tactics meeting every day talking about these things, right? We're just not using them in that way. They become just an idea or a concept, but not really being utilized in the way that they're meant to. And then they become, I would say, ceremonial, right? They become just a paperwork exercise. And it doesn't allow for that coordination. It doesn't allow for that resource prioritization, right? It doesn't allow for the conversations about really where government intervention should be in order to, well, I would say, speed things up overall. So that's what I think I say with the coordination, is that the idea of everything happening within an EOC, because everyone can come together into that one place, it's lovely. And it happens, I think, in smaller events, right? It can definitely be true. If everyone who's in there is generally reporting up to the same elected official, then that makes sense and is a great coordination model. You can bring everyone into the same place. But in a disaster that is primarily a social impact that crosses many, many borders, that requires these independent actions, we need to have coordination elements, functional coordination, not just having the structure of it like an ESF model, but functional coordination. And, especially when it becomes a federal disaster, excuse me, like a national disaster too, then, because of federalism, we don't all report up to the same elected official. And so we need to really be understanding that dynamic and continuing to build into coordination that's outside of an EOC.
There's a couple of things that are just flying through my mind right now as we discuss this. So like I'm thinking, okay, yeah, big disasters like Katrina, Maria, or Harvey, that impacts several states, or several territories, and then you get into like the BP oil spill, for instance, which is this huge coordinated effort, with impacting not just states, multiple states in that case, but also just like international bodies of water, all sorts of things that are occurring, during this thing. There are tools that we have that we can utilize. Both of you and Andrew kind of get into it with the project management for emergency management. Let's get into that for a little bit. I think Andrew can judge way more than I can because he wrote a book about it. But how do we start moving emergency management away from the reaction, being a reactive group? I mean, I know we do better planning, but into one that really sits down and looks at these things and implements these tools, such as project management, because you guys are both PMPs, right?
Yes, I am. I know, Shannon, you are.
Yep.
Well, one thing I was going to say, and I'll just put this out there, and Shannon, this is, I guess, a statement or a comment, and that is, and I want to go back and revisit what you mentioned in terms of command and control, because, I mean, I'll just talk about this just briefly, because I do have a penchant of going into like lecture mode. So I will pull myself out of that because this is not a lecture.
That's the whole professor thing right there.
The command and control is really just it grows out of military, it grows out of this sort of system of top down. We have to direct people specifically, as opposed to that command and control versus I would say cooperation, coordination, and collaboration, or I like to call it the 3C sort of model of how we should be operating. And I think, you worked for the Red Cross for many years. Red Cross has to work across various different agencies, organizations, et cetera. And you have volunteers, a large volunteer group, right? Mm-hmm. So it's hard to tell people what to do, but you need to coordinate to direct those resources. And having worked with the Red Cross myself in a different place, in a different time, so to speak, that ability to coordinate with people who are working in that situation on the ground becomes really valuable and important. And some of that is long-term, or I'd say longer-term type of planning, 2 to 3 months out, when you're in a situation in terms of response and recovery, especially for large incidents that are taking place. And I think that having to kick things up through the chain of command and then having a response come back down, that's just not viable, for a lot of responses, or a lot of
Exactly.
actions need to be taken. So I'll stop there. Your thoughts on that statement?
Yeah, I agree completely. Exactly. That's and I think coming from that experience of working with Red Cross, and especially having a lot of other international societies come in to help us too, other Red Cross societies, we were able to really kind of work through some of the pieces that work or didn't. I would say Hurricane Maria was very, especially on the ground in Puerto Rico, it was such a different struggle than what we would usually do in disasters, and different ways of doing things. And there were so many players, so many new and different players that we don't usually work in. And I think that's when it became the most obvious that, the work that we were doing wouldn't fit into the kind of IAP schedule, the planning P, or even a briefing schedule, right? I mean, it takes too much time, and it loses a lot of fidelity as you go through it, essentially, too. So really building in, there's a lot of project management tools. And, I'm not saying that we should build every disaster into a project. That's just pulling in some of the best pieces of it. And that's what I've proposed some of those. I have an idea for, a lot of a much grander scale of what it could be too, but to really try and pull in the pieces that I've seen that have really worked, that would get us, slowly and easily off of our current, schedule, right? Like a current battle rhythm that we're on to, that isn't really as effective when you're dealing with, a stabilization model with a consequence management. I haven't said consequence management, but that's a big piece of this too, is that command and control is really a crisis management tool. And then we haven't really built out the consequence management, the parts of it that affect the society, the people, the social elements of it that really is a definition of disaster.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the pieces of it that, wanted to really say is that initially I came in and everyone thought that I was saying, ICS bad. And I am not saying that. I think ICS is an amazing tool. It really is, such a simple piece of it that has this sort of magic that can really work out on bringing together people from various different, firefighters, various different first responder entities, and really build them into a structure very quickly. And I think that I've always really valued the pieces of that and the values of it overall, but we lose that. We can't trust the system when we're using it for something it was never built to do. And so that's why we need to build in some of these tools that are built to do the work that we're talking about.
I want to step back a little bit from just necessarily from disaster, right? Because one of the points I think that we're missing, and this goes why disaster management keeps falling short, at least in my mind, is we forget to do, I say the collective we, the royal we, forget to do the pre-work, right? And so, I've written a lot about the social impact of disaster, building upon some of the work that like Daniel Ulrich has done in the past, with a few of his books. I taught that course at UCI for many years. The social impact of disaster, we could start this prior to something occurring, right? And this goes back into community capacity building. This goes into empowering the community to be prepared for disasters, not in the sense of traditional preparedness where we're like, hey, just go buy a kit and you're ready to go, but really have an understanding what their neighborhoods are, really understanding what there is, because what their impact is. And I think about the jurisdiction I work in, we have 114,000 people within the borders of my city, right? We have 40 firefighters on at any given time, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, how many police officers we have on any given time? Add that. So that being said, there's not enough human beings to go around to support human beings in need, right? And when we start just going into systems, like start talking in these terms, which will overwhelm the community, being like, wow, we use unified command, or we use ICS, or we use this, or we use these coordinating bodies, right? This to them doesn't make sense, right? But if you go, hey, you can help your neighbor out by doing this, right? You can, they then become basically building on upon what they're doing. We can actually manage disasters more, and we're seeing this more and more. And I'm not talking about CERT programs; those are great, but really capacity building within the community, and I think that's critical. And that's a step that we're completely missing, and we dismiss wholeheartedly, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen it where and they add that just term into it. They're just volunteers. They're just community members. They're just whatever we want to do to diminish their ability to have ownership and agency and during this time. And we've seen this multiple times going across. I think that's one of the areas where we fail before the disaster occurs.
Yeah, exactly. And, I like to go back to the history of it too. And I'll go back, I watched your last podcast with Arthur too. And I have tremendous respect for Arthur, but I just want to say that I think we're reading different books when we talk about civil defense, because I think we've come up with a wave with different outcomes or different, conclusions on what some of that time was. And, acknowledge that before FEMA, before civil defense too, there was it was the community that did all of this work, right? This is something that we've built as a layer on top, essentially to provide a more structured for coordination, or a more structured way to give aid and to really support the community in their response and recovery. So that's the way I really like to reframe it. The civil defense model was really about having everyone volunteer for the government. And, even at its peak numbers during World War II or right after World War II, it never hit the amount of volunteers that it would need to really meet the goals of what was, anticipated would happen. So we have to acknowledge that it's just, it doesn't necessarily align with our, American norms, our way of doing things. And we have to really, especially with the command and control, we have to acknowledge and be aware of how much some of that language does kind of push back and have like a chilling effect on some of that natural response, what people feel natural to do. And just acknowledge if we're using, some of the kind of freakonomics or some of the behavioral economics type of arguments, that just the idea that we as taxpayers are putting money into emergency management makes us feel like we don't have to do as much, right? And so we have to change some of that language. And in our space, in the emergency management space, we have an opportunity to read some of those books, like Aldridge and Kathleen Tierney, a lot about that social impact piece of it, that really does emphasize that sometimes having, too much government response, too much government intervention actually slows down the response and recovery, right, in the community. And so we need to be able to evaluate. That's a big theme of my book. We need to be able to evaluate it to see from disaster to disaster what parts of it work, right? How can we make those decisions about when it will be helpful to push forward and do something and when it won't. And I think that, my experience working for the Red Cross, especially, working significantly in these big disasters that, when we needed to close down shelters and trying to figure out why people couldn't move on from the shelter environment, why they had such a significant recovery gap. And I found very frequently that it was because they were waiting for FEMA, like waiting for something. I don't mean to make MHUs like the manufactured housing units, the villain in this story, but it was frequently, people waiting for those. And that would be like 18 months, 2 years, and needing something in the middle. So just acknowledging when those different pieces of government intervention, really making sure that we're doing them because it will speed up recovery or, provide better quality recovery overall.
I want to jump in on this because I guess, I don't know, Todd, this was leaked, right? This draft final report, FEMA 2.0, but it's out there. Can I post? I mean, I'm not going to talk to the specifics of this just yet because it's not an official document, but it is being talked about in the news. I don't know, Shannon, have you seen this?
Yeah. I was at the NEMA, the National Emergency Management Association conference too, and it was talked about quite a bit at that conference. Okay. And it's certainly all over LinkedIn, all the different pieces of it. People have done summaries of it. I think it's whatever version it was at any given point, it's been out there quite a bit.
Okay. And I want this to be about what you're proposing and things like that. But one of the points that they drive here, which is like, okay, we already know this to be true, but which is, all disasters start and finish at the local level, and that's the responsibility, et cetera, except, of course, when they're major disasters or catastrophic and they exceed the capabilities of locals to be able to respond. And we're seeing more and more of those types of events that take place. So, and as far as what the local community can muster between the whole of the community, the question is, where's that balancing act between, okay, you're now all responsible, local level, county, state, parish, whatever we want to call it, up the chain, but the feds, well, this is the limited role that we're going to play with this, right?
Yeah. Well, I have a thing that I've been saying a lot. I don't know if it, we'll see if it actually, makes sense to everyone. But when we say things like all disasters are local, I think there's a lot of people in emergency management are saying that like local government, right, is one of those pieces. But when I say all disasters are local, I mean in like to the household, essentially. Yes. Like it impacts the household. And the problem is that, when we're talking about who's in charge again with this idea of like who pays for disasters too. But the key piece of what FEMA is bringing is individual assistance. So they are the ones that are supporting that local household, right? So I think that, just to me, it's a very different, weird perspective to kind of the way that term is being utilized, saying like the federal government is giving money to the local government, which isn't generally the case, right? That's not the specific model, or, it does happen, but, we won't get into all of those pieces. But the thing that a major disaster declaration brings is individual assistance, which is helping an individual household that is in need, right? That's a primary piece of it.
Kind of broken.
Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, that's kind of broken too, though, right? Like how that individual assistance occurs and how it works. And, I mean, like there's, is it practical? We get into this and there's a lot of questions about insurance and all that kind of, there's a whole, my point is like, I think we simplify it. I think sometimes in our head as emergency management professionals, we simplify it going, you just go and you apply for this, grant over here. I mean, if you take a look at the Palisades and the Eaton fire here in California, which is a little over a year old now, it's a year and a couple months, right? And there are still building homes that haven't even gone through the permit process to get to finally get built, right? Yeah. I mean, and like so when you talk about going back and building upon what you're saying, that all disasters are local, right? I mean, there are people who are still displaced, and probably will be for years before those homes are built, and these disasters go back all, we can go back as far as we want to go to Andrew if you want to, not that Andrew, another Andrew.
That was me in my hometown. That Andrew hit me. So
right. And so like, I mean, even from there and earthquakes that have occurred in California, and in the big ones here in California and also up in Alaska, if you think about those areas that are still, what does recovery mean?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if you drive down some areas of Whittier, California, which was hit in 1987, there are still lots that are completely empty that used to have buildings in them in their uptown area, which is like their downtown area, right? I mean, you go to New Orleans today, there are areas that are still not recovered, and probably never will be. So
Yeah.
and this is why when you start talking about disasters are being local, and one more stat I'll throw out there, and I'm sorry to interrupt you on this thing, but you take a look at New Orleans. At one point, 50% of the population of New Orleans was displaced, right?
Yeah.
And even today, there's still 20% smaller population than they were pre-Katrina, right?
Yeah.
That has impact socially, economically, culturally for those communities. So when we look at this, we look at this myopic point as emergency managers of what it means to be disaster management, right? But we don't look at the holistic approach to it, where we start looking at all those cultural aspects of it. And then, you got me on a little bit of a soapbox, but that's where we go.
It's a really important point. And, I'll acknowledge that really what I'm trying to focus on, I really keep saying stabilization. To me, that is the key that we are struggling with now, that we're not utilizing the most efficient, the fastest. We're not really being able to really bring the full resources to bear of the government, of the NGOs, of the community, to really hit that stabilization. And it's too slow. It has too much bureaucracy and not enough coordination. And that's what causes so much of this long-term recovery issues too. I really do posit that if we were able to get these pieces built in with efficiency and then evaluated rather, more consistently, it would have a much more of an impact on recovery. But, to me, long-term recovery, especially, it's got to be I would say I don't want to say whole community, but it really is not just a disaster problem, right? It's not just an emergency management problem. It is about planning for the future of that community and really building back into those pieces. So it needs to be integrated into all of the pieces of government, the planning for it, the concepts of it. We can't have this kind of alternate universe where we have a planning structure for, non-disasters and then a different planning structure for disasters. It's got to be a part of the overall plan when you think about what, long-term a community needs to look like and how you're going to allocate those resources, how you're going to plan for them. So that's my big pitch on these pieces too. And the entire disaster coordination realm, whole community does seem to be the easiest, but it's changed really what I think it's supposed to mean. The pieces that are coming together just for disaster, we need to be as efficient and effective in the time that is most critical to our resources, which is that stabilization period. Response, I guess, is the term, but to me, it goes into that recovery. It goes into really when people are in a place where they're going to be for a while until they build up their home, and they build back the community at that point too. Mm-hmm. To me, that's the answer. That's the piece that we really need to work on, and that will have the greatest impact on that longer term recovery.
One of the pieces I think that what we miss is we do response really well, right? Life safety response, helicopters in the air.
Yeah. The first responder piece, right? Yeah.
Right. All the cool stuff that you see on TV. And when we start to have complaints about the disaster response, I'm putting those in air quotes for those that aren't watching, it's when we fail at the recovery.
Yeah.
And that's where people get frustrated. That's when people protest about what we're doing. It's that recovery. And we can go back to Maria real quick. It was getting power back on into the community where we had the biggest downfall. And simple fixes came up, which I think is interesting. There's a whole other case study. But again, I don't think we failed the people of Puerto Rico in the response. We failed the people of Puerto Rico in getting our lives back up and running as normalcy and and that's where we fail.
And that's the definition of disaster, right? It's
Right.
That is, why disasters are different, right? Is, an emergency, most time your life is not generally impacted, right? Like your social structure isn't generally impacted. But a disaster, that's really when it is. And it requires a different way of thinking, a different way of reacting. So I call that stabilization. I think it responds into early recovery, right? I think it's all different depending on the different ways that you look at the overall cycle. But exactly to that point is that is when it's when people start complaining and when people really acknowledge that things didn't work out well. And it is because we haven't, again, going back to the original piece of the book, we don't have a system for that. Like we have a system for the first responders. We don't have a system that's built to do that piece of it. Yeah,
absolutely.
I do want to disagree with you though, Todd, on since we are in the arena here.
Yeah.
I want to disagree on the response side of things. I think just individual responses fine by certain agencies. However, I think as you point out in your book, some prime examples of the wildfires in Lahaina, the massive floods that took place in the Texas Hill Country, just last year, and the tornado that took place in St. Louis. These are several examples that you cite in your book here where those alerts and the coordination on evacuation or sheltering in place were not acceptable. They failed. Now I can't give them a complete grade, so to speak, but they were not success stories, and there are areas where we can do better. I'm not blaming individuals because I think there are some who made it clear that these systems were really not ready to work, and they were not given the resources that were required in some cases, or communities chose certain people who are not really appropriately qualified for the certain positions. So I just want to make that statement.
Yeah, my biggest concern about
I want to ask Andrew one question though, and I think I know where you're headed with it, and I don't think you're necessarily wrong, but I think if we divide that conversation into pieces, is the failure that they had in those particular cases, was that response or was that pre-disaster planning? Such as systems, such as your alert and warning system, I wouldn't say is response. That's again more pre-disaster planning, and that's just my take on it. But I can see where there's the line there. When I'm saying response, I'm talking about lights and sirens and rescuers on the ground. When you have a fire configuration like that, conflagration, if you will, excuse my early morning language, those are impossible to stop. Like with Palisades and Eaton, the winds are blowing so fast that you could have had 1,000 firefighters on the ground at the start of the fire, and we probably still wouldn't have been able to stop those fires from occurring, right? But the messaging prior to it saying, hey, this is a red flag warning, be prepared to evacuate and things like this, could do life safety issues associated with it. And again, with the Eaton fire, where there's some failures, right, and the response, if we want to call it that, would be with the communication, right, and lack thereof, or maybe the delay in communication. That's what you're hearing in the after action report, right? So I think that we can kind of bifurcate those issues, but I hear what you're saying, Andrew. I just wanted to acknowledge that, and I'll hand it back over to Shannon where she can beat me up a little bit.
No. I mean, what I was really emphasizing in the book is that the concern I have about the way that we use incident command system, right? The way that we've pulled it back into EOCs and really built it into something that is, a mock coordination model, is that we're making ICS less effective in the places where it should be more effective, right? That was one of the things that came out in the after action review for Lahaina, was specifically that these first responders were struggling with incident command system. And I think, we've made it kind of fit every situation. Like this idea of scaling indefinitely too, is that we've lost some of its magic then that actually works for those pieces. And then the second piece about this is that it really does pull away from the sociology piece of it, the how it interacts with the human nature piece of it. And I think what I was trying to emphasize with those pieces, they all happen to be on alerts and warnings, but it really was that single point of failure. Like we're building a system that was meant to originally, the ICS idea of it was that the first person on scene is the incident commander, right? It can be anyone. You have that skill. It can be any pieces of it. But we're building it into this command and control that is so structured in it that we've lost that magic in it, right? We've lost that ability to say that anyone can do this. Whoever's closest to it, right? You do it, right? You point to it, you call 911, the CPR piece of it. So we're losing some of the contingencies, some of the pieces these lessons that we've already learned essentially too. So it's kind of, we've been pulling away with this command and control significantly away from lessons that we've already learned and the disaster sociology of it.
I know Andrew has something to say.
Oh, I was just going to say, this was, Todd and I could argue back and forth on this till the cows come home. So to speak, but it's the single points of failure, I think, that you identified in your book, because as we're living in a technologically complex world, and the unfortunate reality is, as much as AI is out there and can help us, it's not going to help us to basically press the button when a warning needs to be sounded, and that button does not rest in our pocket or at our fingertips, so to speak, because it's back in the office and we weren't given what we were needed, so to speak, or the person who's going to make the call is sick in bed and not available, right, and there's no redundancy there, and the person who would respond gets woken up at 5:20 a.m. in the morning, well after the effects have actually been impacted, so to speak. And the alerts, the red flags did not go up early enough to let people know what they needed to do. And it's those things that I see on a regular basis. It's a judgment call, and that's where folks who are in that position can play a very crucial role. But it shouldn't just be one person. It should be a system that backs it up, that does have redundancies, that does have contingency communications. I teach disaster preparedness for one of the unions in New York City, and one of the things that I say is receive information from multiple channels, get out information on multiple channels, because you don't know. You're in an apartment building. Don't just rely on text or email. If you need to, go door to door, put up flyers, make sure people get the message. And then do it in a way, we talk about people with disabilities and communications channels and things like that. So you need to think about how you provide that information. How is it getting to people? What sort of technologies are they, and I said, that's not necessarily something that you can control. I'm not expecting you to become a specialist on that area, but utilize what's available from New York City Emergency Management or the state or the feds to basically get stuff to people. So.
I read this plan after the Hawaii debacle with messaging with the nuclear bomb, where the city manager is the only person authorized to allow the emergency alert for citywide alert.
Yeah.
Only person is the city manager. So if the city manager goes on vacation, if the city manager gets hit by a car, that's the old by. And I was like, holy smoke. How do you, I get the fact that you don't want to have another, fake nuclear missile, incident going on. But there has to be some trust back down the chain of command. And kind of to Shannon's point is we've lost that ability to allow the first responder. Now, when I mean that, I don't talk about firefighter, police officer, the first person who gets the information to be able to act, with authority. It gets to the point to where there's so much command and control that we lose the flexibility of what ICS is supposed to be all about. I agree with you there. All right, Shannon, we're getting here close to the end, so I want to give you the last line here, and how people get a hold of you, how they can find your book, and all that kind of cool stuff.
Well, thank you so much. I really want to say how much I appreciate coming into the arena. I love that. And I wrote this book as an opportunity to really get the information out there and to start the conversation too. So here is the book, and I put in here in the author's note specifically, I put a couple different email addresses, a couple different ways to get a hold of me, because I'd love to get feedback. I'd love to get disagreement. Tell me how you think that this doesn't work or it doesn't fit into what your experiences are. Really want to be able to build a collective here. This is more of I would say a movement towards really emphasizing, to going back into some of those disaster management techniques, really building back that capacity in the community and getting information out to individuals too. So my intention in this early phase with this book is to really go through the emergency management community, the disaster community, and then start putting it out to a wider audience, especially public administrators, elected officials, the public. So let's try and work on it. I think that something like this can be done. It doesn't have to come from another like fire scope. Like we don't have to rebuild a new ICS in some ways. We can do it collectively. It can be collective action. It can be something that we all work towards and really build an emphasis to. So please do, really, if you get it, I think you put the link in there. It's on Amazon. It's only on Amazon right now, but I have my website for the company, rivermac.com, and that has a whole page on the strategic disaster coordination. I'll be putting more out there, the different pieces of it, and I have the Disasters Are Different blog, in which I kind of go into a little bit more of the stories behind this, a little bit of a changing the viewpoints on some of these pieces. So I just want to emphasize, please do give me feedback, talk about it. If you're starting to build any of these pieces, let me know. We can pull it all together. I've seen, even since I published the book, multiple articles, journal articles that are, from Australia and New Zealand, in fact, both of them that had articles that are saying very similar pieces about really building out that strategic coordination piece of it. So it is, I think there's some convergence around this. So please be a part of it. Let me know what you think. Let me know how we can make it better.
And again, the name of the book is the Strategic Disaster Coordination, The Missing Architecture of Disaster Management, only on Amazon. And Andrew, I'll give you the last. Oh, we got a comment here. See what this says. It was Andrew saying the same thing.
I just posted it on LinkedIn.
It's all right. So real quick, Andrew, I'll give you the last word, and then we'll close this show out.
It was a great conversation, Shannon, and I think what the points here are very timely. And I know that this has been something that has been discussed over the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years, but has become much more pressing given the fact that, and it wasn't. I mean, I remember I did an interview 10 years ago. And I was talking about maximum of maximums, and this maximum of maximums that was introduced as a concept under Craig Fugate when he was head of FEMA, is much more pressing and much more real at this point. This is not the stuff of fiction. We're dealing with. I mean, you have extreme heat out in California right now. Just we had a brutal winter on the East Coast, and then we throw everything else on top of that. We have a war going on in the Middle East. The choke point around the Straits of Hormuz, and I could probably go on for another couple minutes on this. It's challenging and it's difficult, and so and our systems, our capabilities are not up to snuff to dealing with it. So I think this book is really important for folks to read. So I really encourage people to go out and buy it, read it. And as you have already said, I think giving you feedback, because as an author myself, please give the authors feedback, good or bad. You don't like the book, you're using it as my book is a doorstop. Please let me know. Or, it's been great for your fire that you're, in your fireplace. But honestly, putting the joking aside, we do want to. It's very helpful for us because we really want it to be a conversation, not just a monologue.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, Shannon, love to have you on again sometime and have this conversation because it's even just about anything for that matter. But hey, everybody, as always, please stay safe and especially today, stay alert and stay hydrated.
When the sirens scream out loud, or the voice that breaks the cloud, heads held high when things go wrong, will guide you through its strength and song. Disaster strikes without a sound, chaos reigns but we're around. Public safety in our hands, standing strong in every land. Emergency